I have stood still for 22 years. That is not a boast. It is closer to a confession. 22 years of standing so still that pigeons have landed on my bearskin and mistaken me for stone. 22 years of children pulling faces at me from 3 feet away while their fathers laughed and their mothers apologized. 22 years of not moving when a woman fainted in the July heat outside the Ashcroft gates and her husband screamed at me, right into my face, spit on my chin, to do something, you useless bloody statue. I did not move then. I moved on the 14th of June, at 11 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, in front of 400 people and a row of cameras, and I have not stopped thinking about it since. Let me take you back a bit. You need to understand what was being handed over that day, or none of the rest of it will land the way it should. Ashcroft Palace sits at the top of a long gravel court in the old quarter of Verlin's capital, and in June the whole place turns into an oven. The stone holds the heat. The gravel throws it back up at you. By 11 in the morning, the air above the parade square wobbles like it does over a road, and if you look at the far end of the court, the men standing there seem to shimmer and swim, as though somebody has drawn them badly. We wear scarlet tunics with a high collar. Under that, a shirt. Under that, whatever you can get away with. The bearskin weighs a little over 1.5 kilograms, which does not sound like much until it has been sitting on your skull for 4 hours, and the sweat has run down the inside of the strap and pooled in the hollow of your throat and gone cold there. There is a trick to it. You lock your knees very slightly loose, not straight. Never straight. Straight knees are how men go down, and you find a point in the middle distance and you give yourself to it. You go somewhere else. Most of the lads pick a memory. A few pick a song. I have always picked the bridge. I will come back to the bridge. That morning we had been on the square since 8:30, which was cruel even by the standards of a household investiture, and the sun had come up hard and white and stayed there. The tourists arrived in waves. First the serious ones with the long lenses, elbowing for a spot at the rail before 9. Then the coaches, which disgorged 40 at a time, all of them fanning themselves with the little laminated maps they hand out at the visitor center. Then later, the families, sticky children, buggies. A man in a football shirt with a can of something he was pretending was lemonade. Somebody's toddler was crying. She cried for about 40 minutes, on and off, in that broken engine way small children have, and I could hear her mother saying, "SHH, SHH, look at the soldiers, look at the lovely soldiers," and the crying getting louder because a 2-year-old does not care about the lovely soldiers. A 2-year-old cares that it is 31 degrees and she has been standing in a car park. I remember thinking, fair enough, love, fair enough. That is the thing nobody tells you about the stillness. Your body stops, but your head does not. Your head runs and runs. You can be a statue on the outside and a riot on the inside, and nobody will ever know. Nobody knew about me, not for 22 years. The Ellenmark Cross is not our highest decoration. It is not even our second highest. If you asked a man in the street what the Ellenmark Cross was, he would probably guess it had something to do with the Navy, and he would be wrong. It is a small thing, bronze, not silver, about the size of a 2-pound coin, 4 arms, a bit of ribbon in a dull green that was chosen, I am told, because it was the color of the water under the bridge at Ellenmark on the morning it happened. Somebody in the College of Arms thought that was poetic. It is not poetic. The water was that color because of the mud and the diesel and what was in it by the end. And if the man who chose the ribbon had been standing where I was standing, he would have picked a different color, or he would have picked no color at all. 19 of them were awarded. 9 of those were awarded to men who were already dead. Ellenmark was not a victory. I want to be very clear about that, because in the years since, the story has been sanded down and polished up and put in school books, and in the school books it is a victory. It was not. It was a bridge over a slow brown river in a country that is not our country, in a war that our government has since described in an official document, in careful language, as an intervention of contested strategic value. That is what they call it now, an intervention of contested strategic value. We called it the bridge. We held it for 11 hours because there were people behind us who needed those 11 hours to get out, and we did not know if it would work, and it mostly did not. And when the relief came at dusk, there were 14 of us on our feet out of 31. Corporal M.O. Vance was not one of the 14. He was 34. He had a laugh like a dropped tray of cutlery, enormous and clattering and impossible to be near without joining in. He carried a photograph of his son folded into the sweatband of his helmet, which was against about 4 different regulations, and which every officer who ever saw it decided not to see. The boy in the photograph was 6 years old and had a gap in his front teeth and was holding up a fish. M.O. Vance died 40 feet from me, at about 4 in the afternoon, on the eastern side of the bridge, and he did not die well or quickly or in any way that would look good in a film. I was the one who went through his pockets afterwards, because that is what you do, because somebody has to, and I found the photograph, and I put it in my breast pocket, and 11 days later I sat in a small hot living room in a terraced house on the coast, and gave it back to a woman named Ilse Vance while her son played in the next room and did not come in. The boy did not come in. I want you to hold on to that. He did not come in. The late Queen Margaret, the second of that name, 41 years on the throne, pinned the Ellenmark crosses herself in the autumn after the bridge. All 19. She insisted on it. There was some argument about it at the time because she had been unwell that year and her people wanted to farm it out to a general, and she would not have it. And so on a wet October morning she stood for 2 hours and 20 minutes in the long gallery and did the whole thing herself. I was there. I was 26 and I did not have my sergeant's stripes yet, and I had not slept properly in 3 months. She came down the line very slowly because she was slow by then, and when she reached the 9 crosses that had no living man attached to them, she did not hand them to the families the way you would hand somebody a parcel. She held each one in both hands for a moment first. She looked at it. She was a small woman by that stage of her life, and she had to look up at most of us, and I remember her eyes were a very ordinary pale gray, nothing regal about them, just a tired woman's eyes. When she came to Ilse Vance she said something, quietly, not for the room. I was 11 feet away and I heard it, and I have never told a single living soul what it was, and I am not going to start now, and if that annoys you then I am sorry, but there it is. Some things are not for the story. Some things belong to the 2 people who were standing there. But I will tell you what I saw. I saw the Queen of Verlin put a small bronze cross into a widow's hands, and then close her own hands over the top of the widow's hands, and hold them there for the length of about 4 heartbeats, longer than protocol, long enough that the equerry beside her shifted his weight. And I saw the boy. He was 9 by then. He was standing beside his mother in a blazer that was slightly too big for him across the shoulders, the way they always are, because you buy them big so the child can grow into them. His hair had been combed with water. You could see the tracks of the comb. He did not cry. He stood there like a little soldier, chin up, and he watched the Queen's hands close over his mother's hands, and his face did something I have never been able to describe properly in 22 years of trying. He was not sad. That is the thing. I have thought about it more than I have thought about almost anything else in my life, and I am telling you, he was not sad. He was ashamed. He was 9 years old and he was ashamed, and I did not understand why, and I did not ask, because you do not ask a 9-year-old boy why he looks like that at his father's medal ceremony. His name was Anders Vance. The late Queen died 2 years ago last November. I stood on the route for 11 hours the day of the funeral. 400,000 people, they said. Though I do not know how anybody counts that. I remember an old man beside the rail with his hat in his hands and rain running off the end of his nose, and he did not wipe it away, not once, the whole time. After she was gone, the household went through what the household always goes through, a sort of long, awkward, unspoken clearing of the throat. There is a new set of hands on everything. The signatures change. The prayers change. And the ceremonies that used to be hers get done by somebody else now. And everybody says, of course, naturally, the king is very busy, and nobody says the other thing. Queen Consort Adelheid took on the investitures in the spring. I want to be fair to her here, because I think in the version of this that got shouted about afterwards, she comes off badly, and I do not think she deserves that. Not entirely. She is a woman in her 60s who married into a family that has been watching her sideways for 30 years, and she works, and she reads her briefings, and I have watched her stand for 2 hours in a drafty hall talking to a queue of people about their gardens with a face that never once slipped. That is a job. That is a hard job. I would not do it for a pension twice the size of mine. But she was not the late queen. And on the 14th of June, the household was holding what the program called a commemorative presentation of the Ellenmark Cross, which is a very long way of saying that in the 22 years since the bridge, 2 more men had been found who should have had one and did not. That happens. Records are a mess in a war. Somebody's name gets typed wrong, or a file goes into the wrong box, or the man himself never asks because he has decided he does not want it, and then he dies and his family goes looking through his things and finds a citation nobody ever actioned. 2 men, 2 crosses, both posthumous. And because it was a nice story, the Crown puts right an old wrong. They did it outside, on the parade square in front of the gates, where the cameras could get it and the tourists could see. In June, at 2 in the afternoon, in 31 degrees. I have been in this household long enough to know exactly whose idea that was, and I promise you it was not a soldier's. We came to the present about 10 minutes before the party came out. Rifles up, and that long, lovely rattle of 200 men doing one thing at once, which is the only music I have ever really loved. I was third from the left in the front rank, 6 feet from the red carpet they had rolled out over the gravel, close enough that, when the party walked past me, I would be able to see the pattern on the Queen Consort's shoes. The crowd had thickened. They always do. A ceremony pulls people the way a fire pulls people. Half of them do not even know what they are looking at. They have just seen a lot of other people looking at something, and they have come to look at it too. I could hear the click and whir of the long lenses. Somebody's phone was playing a video at full volume, some idiot thing, tinny music, and I heard a woman hiss at him to turn it off, and I heard him say, all right, keep your hair on. The toddler was still crying. Different toddler by then, possibly. Hard to say. They are all the same toddler after a while. And I found my point in the middle distance. A chip in the stone of the gate pillar, about 4 feet up, been there as long as I have, and I went to the bridge. That is where I go, every time. I do not choose it, it chooses me. I go back to 11 hours on a bridge over brown water, and I stand there in my head, and I do my 4 hours on the square, and nobody ever knows. The program was read out by a man from the Lord Chamberlain's office, with a voice like a very expensive door closing. First cross, Rifleman Petter Ostrand. His daughter came forward. She was about 50 in a navy dress, and she was shaking so badly that when the Queen Consort put the box into her hands, she nearly dropped it, and Her Majesty caught the underside of it without seeming to move at all, which was, and I will give her this, freely, beautifully done. Not a flicker. Just 2 hands under a box and a small smile and a word, and the woman got her breath back and stood up straighter. The crowd applauded. The daughter went back to her place. Fine, good. That is what these things are for. Second cross. And the man from the Lord Chamberlain's office cleared his throat and read out. The Ellenmark Cross, awarded posthumously to Corporal Emil Vance, to be received on behalf of the family by Mr. Anders Vance. I want to explain what happened in my chest, because it was not what you would expect. It was not a leap, it was not a jolt, there was no drama in it at all. It was more like, you know when you are carrying something heavy up a flight of stairs, and you have carried it a long way, and you are nearly at the top, and then your foot comes down on a step that is not there. Just that half second where the world removes a stare. Emil Vance. Emil Vance, who had already been given his cross. Emil Vance, whose widow had already had the late Queen's hands closed over her own. Emil Vance, who was mine, who died 40 feet from me, and whose photograph of his son I carried in my breast pocket for 11 days until my sweat had gone into the paper. There were not two Emil Vances, there was one. I would have staked my life on it. And then I understood, and it took me maybe a full 2 seconds, standing there at the present with a rifle in my hands, which is a very long time. I understood that it was not a second cross for Emil. It was a replacement. Somebody had asked for a replacement cross. Somebody had written to the household and said the original was lost or damaged or gone, and the household had said yes, of course. We are so sorry. And somebody clever in the press office had looked at the paperwork and seen Ellenmark and thought, lovely, we can put that with the other two, we can do it on the square, we can have the Queen Consort handed over, it will play beautifully. And they had put out the seating, and rolled the carpet and briefed the cameras. And Ilse Vance was not there. I could see the whole front row. I had been looking at it for 4 hours. There was no Ilse Vance in it. He came forward. He was 31 years old. He had his father's shoulders and none of his father's laugh. I knew that within a second and a half of looking at him, because a man who laughs like Emil Vance carries it in his face even when he is not laughing. It lives in the lines around the eyes, and this man's face was smooth and closed like a shut drawer. Gray suit, good one, better than mine. And he walked up that carpet with his chin high and his hands loose at his sides, past 400 people and a row of long lenses, and he looked absolutely nothing like the boy in the blazer with the comb tracks in his hair. Except once. Right at the end, just before he reached her, he did something with his mouth. A tiny thing. A sort of tightening, a pull at one corner, gone almost before it happened. And I was 9 years back in the long gallery on a wet October morning, and I was watching a small boy be ashamed. I found out the rest of it afterwards in pieces, the way you always do, a bit from the padre, a bit from a woman in the records office who should not have told me and did, a bit from a newspaper that got about 60% of it right and made the other 40% up. Ilse Vance had been ill for a long time, years, the kind of illness that is expensive and slow and has no ending except the one ending. Her son had not been there for it. Not for any of it. Not for the diagnosis, not for the treatments, not for the 2 moves into progressively smaller flats, not for the call she made, and he did not answer. There had been a falling out when he was in his 20s, and the falling out had become a silence, and the silence had become the kind of thing that has been going on so long that neither party can remember how to end it and both have stopped trying. 18 months before that June morning, she had gone into a hospice. And somewhere in the sorting out of a life, the flat, the boxes, the small brown envelope of a woman's whole existence, the Ellenmark cross had gone. Sold, I heard, to a private collector, through a dealer in the old quarter who does very good business in exactly this sort of thing, and who I would very much like 10 minutes alone with. 3,400. That was the figure I was given. I do not know if it is true. I have chosen to believe it because a number is easier to hold than the alternative, which is not knowing. And then, when the money was gone, and money like that goes, he had written to the household, on behalf of the family, explaining that his late father's decoration had been lost during a house move. And they had said yes. Of course they had said yes. Why would they not? A war hero's son, a lost cross, a grieving family. They put out the carpet. 2 things happened in the same second, and I am still not entirely sure which one came first, and I have had 2 years to think about it. The first is that Queen Consort Adelheid opened the box and lifted out the Ellenmark cross, and the sun, which had been behind the west wing all morning, and had just, at that exact moment, come out over the top of it, caught the bronze, and threw a little coin of light onto the front of Anders Vance's very good gray suit. The second is that my glove creaked. That is all it was. My right glove on the small of the rifle, leather and old and dry from 22 years of sun, and I had closed my hand. I did not decide to close my hand. I want to be extremely clear about that, because in the weeks afterwards there was an inquiry, and in the inquiry a man in a very clean office asked me 11 different ways whether I had decided. I had not decided anything. My hand closed on the rifle the way your hand closes on a rail when the train brakes. And it creaked. In the whole of that square, 400 people, 200 men at the present, the long lenses whirring, the toddler crying somewhere at the back, it should have been nothing. It should have been less than nothing. You could not have heard it from 10 feet. She was 6 feet away. Queen Consort Adelheid, with a dead man's medal in her fingers and the sun on the back of her neck, 6 feet from me, and turning to put it into the hands of the man who had sold it. And she stopped. She stopped and she turned her head and she looked at me. 22 years. 22 years of not moving, and the whole time, the entire time, I had believed, genuinely believed, the way you believe in gravity, that the stillness was the discipline, that the not moving was the thing, that a guard is a man who has taught his body to shut up. I had it backwards. The stillness was never the discipline. The stillness was the hiding place. It was where I had been putting the bridge for 22 years. It was where I had been putting M.O. Vance, and the photograph, and the 11 days it lived in my breast pocket, and a 9-year-old boy who would not come into the front room, and a small woman with tired gray eyes closing her hands over a widow's hands for 4 heartbeats longer than protocol allowed. I had been standing on top of all of it for 22 years, like a lid. And now the Queen Consort of Verland was looking directly into my face, and 400 people were following her eyes, and the long lenses were swinging round like a field of sunflowers finding the sun, and every camera on that square was coming to rest on a sergeant in the front rank with a creaking glove. Anders Vance had his hands out, waiting, and I heard myself take a breath, a real one, from the bottom, the kind you take before you go into water, and I heard my own voice come out into the hot, still air of the parade square, and it did not sound like me at all. I said, "Ma'am, that is not his. You have never heard a silence like it. 400 people, 200 men, a parade square the size of a football pitch with stone on 3 sides, which means every sound in it comes back to you a half-second later off the west wall, so that when I said the words I heard them twice. Once out of my own mouth, and once again, thinner, from the direction of the gate, that is not his, as though somebody else had said it and I had merely agreed." Even the toddler stopped. I have thought about that a great deal. Some part of that child, somewhere under the heat and the boredom and the 2 hours in a car park, understood that the adults had all gone very quiet at once, and that this was serious, and shut up. 2 years old, and she knew. Queen Consort Adelheid did not move. The medal was still between her thumb and her forefinger. The little coin of sunlight was still sitting on the front of Anders Vance's suit, just below the second button, trembling very slightly, because her hand had not gone perfectly still. She is human, whatever else, and the light was shaking on him like something alive. His hands were still out. Nobody had told them to come down. The equerry moved first. They always do. He was a major from a cavalry regiment, 38 or so, and he took 1 step in from the Queen Consort's left, and I saw his mouth begin to open, and I knew exactly what was about to come out of it. "Sergeant, you will stand fast," and I want to say on the record that I would have. If he had said it, I would have. 22 years is not nothing. The body knows what it knows. But she lifted 1 finger. Just one, off the medal about an inch and back down. And the major shut his mouth and stopped where he was and became, for the next 4 minutes, a very well-dressed piece of furniture. She looked at me for what felt like a year, and was probably 4 seconds. Then she said, and her voice carried, because she has been trained to make her voice carry, "That is a skill. That is a thing they teach you, and she is very good at it," she said. "Sergeant, explain. Not how dare you, not silence in the ranks, not remove that man. Explain." I have gone back over that moment more times than I can count, and I have never once been able to decide whether it was the bravest thing I have ever seen a person do or simply the most curious. Possibly there is no difference. Possibly, at a certain altitude, they are the same thing. My mouth had gone completely dry. 22 years of standing in the sun, and I had never once been dry like that. I said, "Ma'am, that cross was awarded to Corporal Emil Vance in the Long Gallery in October 22 years ago. Her late Majesty put it into the hands of his widow. I was there. It was not lost." And then, and this is the part I did not plan, the part I could not have planned, because I did not plan a single word of any of it. "It was sold, ma'am." There was a noise from the crowd then. Not a gasp. It is never a gasp, whatever the papers write afterwards. It was a sort of low, rolling ah that started at the front and went backwards through 400 people in about a second and a half, the way wind goes over a field of barley. And every long lens on that square went from me to Anders Vance. He had not moved. That is what I remember most clearly. In all the noise and all the light and 400 people turning to look at him, Anders Vance stood absolutely still on that red carpet with his hands out and his chin up, and he did not flinch, and he did not turn, and he did not look at me. He looked at the medal. He looked at that little bronze cross in the Queen Consort's fingers with an expression I could not read at all, and I have spent 2 years trying, and the closest I have ever come, and I offer this to you knowing it is probably wrong, is that he looked like a man watching a train he had meant to catch pull slowly out of a station. And then the ground argued with us. I will tell you exactly what I felt, and it will not match what you have seen in films. There was no bang. Not first. First there was a shove from underneath, through the gravel, up through my boots and into my knees, a single enormous soft blow like being kicked by something too large to be angry, and my bearskin shifted forward on my head, and every window in the east range of Ashcroft Palace made a sound I have never heard glass make and never want to again. Then the bang. It arrived about a half-second later from over the west wall, out beyond the gates, out in the direction of the old market square, where the flower stalls are on a Saturday, and the man with the bad accordion plays outside the tram stop. Flat, enormous, wrong. I knew what it was before it finished. Everybody who has been at a bridge knows what it is before it finishes. Behind me, somewhere in the depth of the square, a woman began to scream and could not stop. Here is what 400 people do. They do not run, not immediately. That is the thing nobody tells you either. For about 2 seconds, 2 entire seconds, which is an eternity, 400 people stand completely still and look at each other, because the human animal wants confirmation before it panics. It wants somebody else to go first. Then somebody goes first. And then it is a stampede. And it is the worst thing I have ever seen on a parade square, worse than the bridge, because on the bridge everybody had a rifle and a job, and here there were prams. The rail at the front went down. 400 people came off the barriers and into the gravel court in a single ugly wave, and the noise was, I cannot do the noise. There is no word. It is not screaming. Screaming is a clean sound. This was 400 separate people all making a different sound at once. A man in a football shirt went past me at a dead sprint, holding a child upside down by one arm. Not out of cruelty. He had just grabbed. That is all. He had grabbed whatever he could reach, and he was running, and the child was upside down, and he did not know. The long lenses hit the gravel and were kicked to pieces in about 4 seconds. And over all of it, out beyond the west wall, out over the market square, A black column was going up into that clean blue June sky, straight up, and going brown at the top, and the air was full of paper. Paper, thousands of pieces, just turning over and over, coming down slowly, glittering. I have never found out what it was. Receipts probably, somebody's stall. It looked like snow. Do you stay? That is the question. That is the whole of it. Everything else in this story is just furniture around that one question. And I am going to be honest with you now in a way I have not been honest with anybody, including the inquiry, including my wife. I wanted to run. Not away. I want to be clear. I did not want to run away. I have never in my life wanted to run away. That is not the temptation. That has never been the temptation. I wanted to run towards. There were people in that market square. There were people in that market square right now, under that column, in among that paper. And I am a soldier, and I have done this before. I have done this before. I know what a man looks like when the ground has gone under him. And I know what to do with my hands. And I know that in the first 4 minutes you can save someone that you cannot save in the 5th. And I was standing on gravel 200 yards away in a red tunic, and a bearskin holding a ceremonial rifle with no round in it. Doing nothing. The order came down the line. Hold. It came from the captain of the guard, and it came fast and flat and without any decoration at all, and it went down 200 men in about 3 seconds. Hold cordon, nobody through the gate. And I understood it. I want you to know that I understood it completely and immediately, the way you understand something in your spine before your head catches up. There was a queen consort on that square. There were 400 civilians in an open court with 3 stone walls and 1 gate. A second device is not a theory. A second device is a habit. And the one thing that 400 people in a stampede must not do is pour out of a gate into a street where somebody might have put something else. The gate was the only way out. And 200 men in scarlet were the only thing between 400 panicking civilians and that gate. Hold. So I held. I turned, we all turned. It is a movement, it has a name. It looks like nothing on the parade square, and it is the single most useful thing I have ever been taught. And I brought the rifle across, and I locked my knees very slightly loose, and I put my back to the burning market square where the people were, and my face to 400 civilians coming at me at a dead run. And I did not move. A woman hit my chest at full speed. I do not know how old she was. 50, perhaps. She hit me and bounced and went down on the gravel, and I did not catch her. I did not put a hand out, because if I break the line breaks. And the man on my left, Corporal Idris, took 2 steps back into the gap I would have left and put his shoulder into the man behind her and held. She got up. She was shouting into my face. I could not hear a word of it. Her hands were on my tunic and she was pulling at the buttons, actually pulling at them, the way people do when they have gone past language. I looked at the chip in the gate pillar, 4 feet up. I went to the bridge. We held that gate for 19 minutes. 19 minutes is not very long. 19 minutes is the length of the queue in a post office. 19 minutes is nothing. I could not tell you the difference between minute 4 and minute 14 if you paid me. It came in fragments, and I have never been able to put them in order, and I have stopped trying, and I will just give them to you the way they come. Idris beside me, bleeding from the eyebrow, saying steady, 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 not to the crowd, to himself, over and over, the whole time. A boy of about 11, on his own, absolutely on his own, standing in the middle of a stampede with his arms straight down by his sides, screaming for his mother. A man trying to climb the line, actually trying to climb it, boot on Idris's thigh, hands on his shoulders, and Idris standing there like a wall and letting him. Somebody's shoe. One shoe, a woman's, red, sitting on its own in the middle of the gravel with everybody running around it and nobody touching it. And Ash, coming down with the paper by then, sitting on my sleeve, Gray on scarlet, very clear, very fine, and I remember thinking with total calm, that is not from a flower stall. The queen consort did not leave. I want that in this story, because it was left out of most of the ones that got printed. Her protection officers had her by both arms within 4 seconds of the blast. I saw it. They were extremely fast. They were superb. And they had her turned and moving towards the east door of the palace before the paper had started to come down. And she stopped them. I did not see how. I was busy. But I saw the result, which was that 90 seconds later Queen Consort Adelheid was standing on the gravel at the western end of the parade square with her shoes ruined and her hair coming down, holding a child of about 4 in her arms, somebody's child. I have no idea whose. She never found out either, and pointing and shouting and organizing 400 hysterical people into the shelter of the colonnade under the West Range. The colonnade, which was the right answer, stone roof 3 sides away from the glass. Her officers were beside themselves. One of them was almost weeping with rage. She stayed for the whole 19 minutes. And Anders Vance was on the red carpet, alone, and everybody was running, and the medal was on the gravel. She had dropped it. Of course she had. 2 men had grabbed her by the arms and she had dropped it and it had gone down into the stones and it had bounced. I saw it bounce, and the green ribbon had come to rest across the edge of the carpet. And he went down on his knees. In 400 running people, on a square that had just been hit, with the sky going black over the west wall. He went down on his hands and knees in his very good gray suit, and he went through the gravel with his fingers looking for that cross. That is when I stopped hating him. I want to be extremely careful about what I am saying, because I have been misquoted on this, and I am not saying what people think I am saying. I am not saying he was forgiven. That was never mine to do. I am not saying it was all right. It was not all right. He sold his mother's husband's medal while she was dying in a hospice, and he did not go and see her, and no amount of gravel and no amount of fire changes that, and I will go to my grave believing it. What I am saying is that I looked at a 31-year-old man crawling on a parade square with the sky coming down, tearing his hands open in the stones, hunting for a small bronze cross he had already sold once. And I understood that he had not sold it because it meant nothing to him. He had sold it because it meant everything, and he could not carry it, and he could not put it down, and so he had got rid of it, and it had not worked. It had not worked for one single day. He had spent 3,400 and he had bought himself precisely nothing, and here he was, 22 years after a wet October morning in the long gallery, on his knees on the gravel with his hands bleeding. He never came into the front room. He was 9 years old, and his father was dead in a country he could not find on a map, and a queen came and put a medal into his mother's hands, and the whole world told him he should be proud. And he was ashamed, and nobody ever asked him why. He found it. At about minute 11, I think, though I would not swear to it. He found it and he got up off his knees, and he stood on that ruined carpet with the cross in his fist, and his suit gray with dust, and his hands running blood, and he looked around at 400 people screaming and a queen consort with somebody else's child on her hip, and 200 men in scarlet standing perfectly still in front of a gate. And he walked. Not out, not to the gate, not away. He walked to the colonnade, and he put himself at the end of the line the queen consort was building, and he started pulling people in off the gravel with his bleeding hands. And he did that for the next 8 minutes, and he did not say a single word to anybody, and nobody knew who he was. The blast was in the market square, at the tram stop, at 19 minutes past 2 on a Saturday afternoon in June. 11 people died. I am not going to describe them. And I am not going to name them, because they are not furniture in my story, and it would be an obscenity to use them that way. They were 11 people who went out to buy flowers. The man with the accordion lived. I looked. I needed to know, and I looked, and he lived, and he has never played there again, and I do not blame him. It was not aimed at us. It was not aimed at anything, really, which is the part nobody can ever accept. There was no message. There was no cause that anybody could ever satisfactorily explain to the families. Two young men and a van and a grievance so thin you could see daylight through it. The inquiry into the security failures took 14 months and produced 1,100 pages, and I have read every one of them, and they do not say anything. The other inquiry, mine, took 6 weeks. A man in a very clean office with a very good pen asked me, 11 different ways, whether I had decided to speak. I told him the truth, which is that I did not decide anything, and that my glove creaked, and that the rest of it came out of a hole in me that I did not know was there. He did not like that. He wanted a decision. Inquiries want decisions because a decision can be a fault, and a fault can be a paragraph, and a paragraph can be an ending. I was found to have committed a breach of discipline. That is correct. I did. I broke silence on a ceremonial parade in the presence of Her Majesty, and I would do it again, and both of those things are true at once, and I have made my peace with it. I was not dismissed. I have never been told why, officially. Unofficially, I am told a letter arrived at the household from the Queen Consort's private secretary, and I am told it was 2 lines long, and I am told nobody has ever seen it since. I have never asked. I do not want to know. Some things belong to the 2 people who were standing there. Ilse Vance died the following March. Her son was there. I know that because he wrote to me 1 letter in October, 4 months after the square, handwriting like a boy's. He did not apologize, and I was glad, because an apology to me would have been the last obscene thing in a story that had enough of them. He wrote 3 sentences about the hospice and the window and what she said, and I am not going to repeat them, and then he wrote 1 more sentence, and it was this: I have given it back. The Ellenmark Cross, awarded posthumously to Corporal M.O. Vance, now sits in a case in the Regimental Museum, in the 3rd room on the left, at the end of a row of 19. 9 of them are behind glass, because there is nobody left to give them to. His is the 10th. The card underneath it says his name, and his rank and the date, and then it says donated by the family, which is a sentence I read every year on the 14th of June, and which takes me a very long time to get past. I am 51 now. I have 4 years left if my knees hold, and they will not. I still stand. The tourists still come, and the children still pull faces, and in June it is still 31 degrees on that gravel, and the heat still comes up off the stones and hits you under the chin. And I still go to the bridge. But I have stopped believing the thing I believed for 22 years, that the stillness is the discipline. It is not. Any fool can be a statue. I have watched men be statues for a decade, and it cost them nothing because they had nothing under the lid. The discipline is knowing what is underneath and standing anyway. A man who feels nothing and does not move is not a soldier. He is furniture. A man who feels everything and does not move, that is a soldier. And a man who feels everything and moves once at the right moment, for the right reason, in front of 400 people and every camera in the country, knowing exactly what it will cost him. I do not have a word for that. But I know it creaks.